Crispin Blunt is co-director of that group, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, and a Conservative British MP. Thank you very much for joining the programme tonight, sir. Could you tell us more about this letter which you wrote and what it's asking the government to do?
Well, this letter is now over a week old, and the situation has got very much worse since. And our anxiety as a law centre, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, we originally set up to find a route for justice for Palestinians who face over 100 years of dispossession in one way or another, to try and find a way to have frankly, a mass-funded route where lawyers and writs can be used to represent Palestinians rather than bullets, bombs and mortars, which simply get the response we're seeing now in Gaza and write Israel's narrative for them. The moral and legal position of the Palestinians is very strong, and it's on that playing field they ought to compete. Then we were pitched into this awful disaster following the 7th of October. It is undoubtedly true that the Palestinian Hamas-led fighters are responsible for a very serious war crime. But responding to one war crime with another war crime is not acceptable. And there is a duty on international leaders of other countries then to restrain the state that is about to commit war crimes or is in the process of committing war crimes. Otherwise, if you send a message of encouragement, you become complicit. And that's really the essential point. We were writing to the British Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, and the Attorney General to put them on notice that we saw them as complicit because the message going to Israel was insufficiently strong to say, you're breaking the laws of war, you must stop. And the Prime Minister, understandably, wanting to stand alongside the people of the State of Israel and the British Jewish population in this time of great grief and trauma from the savagery of the assault, was not actually discharging his proper duty, which is to make sure that the response wasn't even worse.
So obviously the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, Attorney General will be aware of the points that you've just raised and the points that you make in your letter about the indiscriminate killing of civilians, entire families being eradicated, the levelling of housing blocks, queries over the use of white phosphorus. So what do you think is behind the British government's position here? They know the optics. They understand these arguments you're making, I'm presuming. Is it history? Well, is it the special relationship needing to go along with what America's doing? What's your assessment?
Well, if we knew the history and if our leaders really understood the history, they would recognise that right from the Balfour Declaration in 1917, followed by the British administration of Palestine under a mandate from the League of Nations between 1918 and 1948 until we handed it back when Israel declared independence, our history is tied up with these two peoples. So it's intertwined. And there were two elements of the Balfour Declaration. One triumphantly achieved a safe homeland for the Jews, who had faced most appalling hundreds of years of history of oppression in Europe. But we also promised that we would respect the rights of the existing population. And of course, that hasn't happened at all. And we are now seeing it almost in the last chance saloon. And with this response to Hamas's attack on Israelis, and one ought to be able to understand the context from which that appalling event arose. But if Israel responds in a continuation of what is done already, it will be way outside the realms of the laws of war, way outside the rules of the international community about how we conduct relations between nations. And indeed, the occupation of Gaza is already based on an illegality under international law, a straightforward breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And of course, this conflict is now spilling over into the West Bank, with 80 Palestinians, I think, have been killed since this thing started. And there are 750,000 Jewish people settled on territory that is anticipated to be the territory of a future state of Palestine. That is a straightforward breach of the most fundamental laws between states, all of which are written after the Second World War, learning the lessons from the dreadful actions of the belligerent states in that war.
part of your job, of course, to engage with your constituents and the British public. What is the sense that you get from the public in terms of whether or not they support the Prime Minister's position?
Well, the polling is quite interesting, and it would suggest that the government, and indeed my party, is right out of sympathy with the majority opinion of the public. Of course, everyone is horrified by what happened on the 7th of October, and the fact that over 1,000 innocent Israeli citizens were butchered in the way that they were is utterly and completely inexcusable. But the response is from a state. Now, the people of Israel, understandably, are not only traumatized, they're also enraged by what has happened. But a state has a duty to coolly and calmly consider what the position is under the law. And the Israeli response under the law at the moment is wholly illegal. And Israel's allies have a duty to restrain her. Otherwise, all the liberal democracies are going to be in the most appalling trouble.
Crispin Blunt, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your insights.